live button will come.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Culture for All Festival Week 3. The Culture for All Festival started in January 2021, and after almost a year-long celebration, we are concluding it this October and November. The Culture for All Festival, supported by Tata Technologies, is curated with a focus on diversity and inclusivity, and we have many exciting performances, talks, workshops, trails, and contests to keep you engaged with culture. Through this festival, we are also celebrating the release of a first of its kind, interactive, multilingual, open access digital cultural map by Sahapedia called map.sahapedia.org. Let us give you a glimpse of the website and how you can navigate through it. You can explore our neighborhoods in a whole new way through this new interactive platform. So do browse when you have time. Coming back to today's talk, technology for culture. Technology has been providing artists with new ways to express themselves for a very long time. But over the past few decades, art, culture, and technology have become more intertwined than ever before. Whether it's through providing new ways to mix different types of media, allowing more human interaction, or simply making the process of creating easier. In today's conversation, our three speakers, Rohan Verma, Tanveer Hasan, and Rachna Pande, will delve into this premise and discuss the making of culture through the lens of digital technologies. A quick introduction to today's speakers. Rohan Verma, the CEO of Map My India, is a passionate entrepreneur on a mission to make our world better through maps and location technologies. He is a technocrat and believes there is limitless potential to improve the lives of millions. He studied electrical engineering at Stanford and obtained an MBA from London Business School. Tanveer Hassan has been working with the Wikimedia Foundation since 2018 and is currently a senior program officer of community resources. He has previously worked with the Access to Knowledge program of Center for Internet and Society. An IIT Delhi and MIT alumna, Rachna Pande has worked previously with Sahapedia as the head of technology. She is the founder of Trip My Way and works in the culture and technology sector. She is interested in how societies and technology interact. Welcome, all of you. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. I now request Rachana to begin this exciting conversation.
Thank you so much, Sayali. It's so exciting and such an honor to be coordinating this panel with Rohan and Tanveer. I'm in awe of the work that both Map My India, CIS, and Wikimedia do. So I'm hoping for um, fun discussion with them um, and talking about technology and culture, which isn't talked about enough, I think. Um, I was trying to think of how to frame this conversation and thinking about definitions of technology. And while the word has origins in Greek, the definition as technology keeps evolving, the definitions of technology also keep changing. But there's one definition that I keep coming back to, which was interpreted by a German philosopher around, I think, post-industrial revolution, mid-20th century, where he speaks of techne as something that reveals or brings forth. And so when you're saying revealing, it becomes something that is related to knowledge and truth as well. So the pointing towards technology as a mode for revealing truth, which seems uncannily prescient for present day, where technology is no longer steam engines and locomotives, but it's search engines and algorithms. So when thinking of technology in that context as sort of revealing for culture, um, I think of audiences, I think of access, I think of engagement. Who are we revealing to and for whom? Are they experts? Are they amateurs? Are they organizations? Are they individuals? Are they tech savvy? Are they not so tech savvy? How are they going to get this information? This is a question of format. This is a question of language, design. Uh, the how of the revealing also points to um, indexing, search, recommendations, etc. And then how they're going to engage with it, the interactivity of it. Are they passive consumers? Are they creating? Are they co-creators? Or is there an interactive form of engagement with whatever it is that is being revealed? And so with all of these perspectives to technology for culture, even within Sahapedia, as the past 3 years, each of us had a very different perspective to what technology for culture means. And even within this room, I think all of us will have very different approaches to technology for culture, with Wikimedia and its volunteer-driven approach, with an open source IP, with Map My India and a private organization, proprietary tech, and with Sahapedia, which uses a bit of both. Um, I think we can perhaps begin by each of us talking about how we interpret technology for culture in the context of your work and your experiences, and then take it forward. Would you like to start, Tanveer?
Thanks, Rachna. I think you framed the conversation really well. Just to add to that, both during my work at the Center for Internet and Society and with the foundation, when we talk about how technology is affecting our everyday life, society at the highest level and culture at a very specific level, there seems to be like 5 pillars in which it operates. If you were to think about digital culture, so to say, I call it the ABCDE of the digital culture. So the A of it is access, the B of that is build, the C is to continue and to collaborate, the D is dissent, and the E is engagement. Now, all of these can be broken down and had independent conversations. But the point there is, if you look at the way the technology and culture have been operating with each other, it's not a very equitable way. One of the big things that technology has been able to shape culture is the way that culture formulates itself and comes to a granular understanding. We have understood culture as in the ways of a longevity of a certain set of practices, a community of practice that keeps over a period of time. Technology has come as a big disruption. We have not been able to understand how quickly and how systemically these changes happen. So when we talk about technology and culture, we also need to talk about, was there a point of digitality within our culture as well? And however we want to frame it, whether we want to frame it as a society culture, we want to frame it as academic culture, we want to put it as a linguistic culture or of other cultural practices. So that conversation to me is very interesting. Before I hand it over to Rohan, I just want to say, building trust, both in terms of usability and in terms of utility, has been one of the key components why we understand technology to be such a major form of discussion or such a major form of influence on culture. If we were to take those two factors out, the utility and the usability, I don't think we would have had this continuous engagement in these conversations. And I'm sure we will pick on these threads again. Thank you.
Go ahead, Rohan.
Hi, Rachna, and hi, Tanveer. And it's so nice to be on the panel with you both. Maps are all about art and all about culture, to be honest. It's a technology that helps reflect or reveal the representation that we are all artists. If you're a map maker, or if you're somebody who is contributing to making a map, essentially we are trying to represent the real world through our own lens, through our own interpretation, and for some purpose or the other that we are trying to communicate. And the passion with which at MapMindia we've been working for the last 25 years is to bring the benefits of maps and map-based technologies to everyone, because we really believe that there are limitless kind of possibilities or use cases or utility, but not just utility, but also learning about our culture, about our goals, about how we should do things so that we're more efficient, that can come from maps. And so specifically also on kind of the work we've done with Sahapedia, especially with Rachna, through these Sahapedia maps, it was such a pleasure to see the video reflecting the ideas, dreams, visions that we had in our heads. I know when Rachna and we used to kind of ideate, reflected on the map that people see. It's not just the technology part that we talked about, the ability to interact with the map, but also a lot of work of artists, writers, cultural catalogers, their content shown on the map so that you can explore it. You can understand Pune, the trees of Pune, the museums, the trails. Every point on a map is somebody's art, somebody's reflection of what they want you to see in the map. We'll go into it a little bit more about technology and culture and maps, but maybe that's the starting point. So yeah.
Thank you both. So let's first start with audiences. Like, who do you create platforms for? How do you decide who this audience is going to be? This is something that at Sahapedia we have been constantly figuring out ourselves. I think we started with a more cultural enthusiast sort of approach. We'll get somebody who's not an expert, but is enthusiastic, has some sort of knowledge. But a scalable platform will have to involve people who are not that interested in culture, but you are getting them engaged into it. And so we've slowly, over the course of the decade or so that Sahapedia has been around, or more than a decade, the latest platform does not assume a scholarly or an expert approach at all. It involves individuals and amateurs. It involves people who have interest but may have no information whatsoever. Even our platform choices have evolved basically by making mistakes. We started off with a very sort of desktop friendly platform. It was a WordPress backend, which was more comfortable for content creators, but not as interactive for consumers or readers. But now the new map .sahapedia.org is mobile first. And this has been, again, learning from mistakes and iterating. In your experience, how do you decide and who decides that who you're going to create this for? And how do you get those people then to engage with the platform once it's been created?
Tanveer, you want to go first or you want me? I'll tell you from MapIndia's perspective. Really, it's ingrained in our mission to kind of bring the benefits of maps and map-based technologies to everybody. So of course, we are mapping specialists, we are map technology specialists. So we understand the potential of the technology and the power of the technology, which is so horizontal. But that's kind of just one part of the story. What's more important to us is to listen, to observe, to understand, and to try to appreciate the different pain points that actually different people are experiencing. And actually, that's why they say that there are infinite use cases for maps. It's just your imagination, which is the limitation. So when COVID hit, for example, the very first thing that we could think from our lens is, the first thing somebody would like to know is there a COVID patient near me? Is there a testing center near me? Is there a treatment center near me? Is there an isolation center near me? And then is there a vaccination center near me? Then not just near me, but near my family members who live away from me and near my work colleagues. And then like where all is this spread? So we thought that, this would, and that's coming from the pain point of people being worried for their health, for their safety, and needing access to information. These are quite base needs in Maslow's kind of law of hierarchy. But applying that to a sudden kind of event that has happened in the world, and then combining it with technology that you are an expert in delivering a solution for, we think that's where magic actually happens. And the other example I'll give you is of Sahapedia itself. The very first time that kind of I got to know about Sahapedia was a conversation with Padampriya. And I was fascinated by this kind of approach of trying for somebody to be working on, some organization to be working on us kind of engaging with our culture, because that's something that kind of resonated as another a base need to belong. And actually this idea of maps and stories and culture and maps being rooted is actually built into the name of Map My India. So it's actually a 17-year old kind of desire of mine that can we kind of map my India? And so that was the connect between Sahapedia and Map My India, that here there are a lot of writers who have kind of talked about explored culture, and here we can bring the mapping element. It just so happened that actually the Sahapedia team, Rachna, Priya, they had thought about this because of Rachna's background on Trip My Way, that there is a way of kind of connecting maps and culture. So very different kind of use cases. We try to think through what are the needs of people and then how to apply technology to that. So.
Tanveer, I know you've worked extensively with communities, specifically in India, and India is a very different place from the rest of the world when it comes to a volunteer-driven, open source content creation thing. It's not something that you have to find the right people to do that, the right content creators who have the knowledge and are willing then to create it. So can you talk a little bit about how do you engage these people?
It's serendipitous. I think that's the word that explains all of this. But let me try and be a little more. I don't want to be vague about it. So the thing is, at the Wikimedia movement, what we do is we try to keep the expectations very low. So when we say that we are trying to work with knowledge, we're talking about knowledge that is accessible. And if you look at the 5 pillars of Wikipedia or the contribution that can be made to Wikimedia projects, we never claim to be authority on anything. We are not even the secondary source of knowledge. We are the tertiary source of knowledge. We never want to be experts. We want to break that hierarchy of creation of knowledge, of production of knowledge. What we want to do is we want to contribute to the knowledge corpus. So while we deeply cherish experts from subject domains and professors from certain backgrounds or specialist knowledge, we deeply cherish their contributions to the movement. But the strength of the movement is a volunteer who's willing to put in effective work, which means that there is a lot of digging around, there's a lot of correction around, there's a lot of interaction. So the strength of the platform is not on the technology alone, or I would want to say that the technology plays, but if you were to think of this in 100% matrix, I think technology is but 30% of what we do. The communities that we have is the 70% of the work, where you are willing to put forward your time. And then there is another community member who looks at that information and then says, maybe we can add to this, or maybe this needs to be checked again. Maybe this needs to be reverted, or maybe this is a contentious issue. So how do we think about it at the level of the policy? So this interaction is what makes the platform robust. Technology definitely plays a role, but community is what steals the show every single time. And this is evident in the way that we have been trying to tackle the questions of, say, misinformation or fake news, or events of immediate urgency and importance. For example, when there are natural disasters or when there is a lot of confusion around, there seems to be a willingness to ensure not only the flow of information, but also the quality of information, which then slowly inches towards knowledge. And to say that platforms of Wikimedia projects suddenly allow you to access knowledge is not doing justice to the work that goes into it. What it does, it takes in information. There's a lot of curation that happens at the volunteer community level. And then slowly over a period of time, it becomes knowledge. So when you look at a Wikipedia page, I always urge people to do this, that yes, the Wikipedia page itself is very interesting, but please click on the talk page as well if you have time. That's when you would see the richness of the discussion. That's when you see how complex the entire exercise of creating of knowledge becomes.
So, and I'm going to come to you in a bit, Rohan. So in case of Wikimedia, the platform has been created. And now we're getting a different set of users to try to contribute to it. Specifically, I'm talking about Indian audiences. When you're working with, and this is a problem that we faced in Sahapedia as well, how do you create a platform that works for, especially a content creation platform that works for different kinds of people, different languages, different people with different experiences with technology and different comfort levels with technology. And a technocratic approach can work, or works well when you're building a platform. But like you said, the community is what builds the strength of, and eventually builds knowledge. So how do you cannot have a community-based approach to build a platform, the tech platform. And a technocratic approach may end up building a platform that doesn't work for a community that is trying to build knowledge. So how do we figure that out?
Oh, if you only had the answer to that question, Rachna.
I'm guessing, so one of the
So-
questions I have is, I think this is something that you guys have been trying to solve. So how do we solve for something where you're working with legacy systems, that
Yeah.
you're trying to innovate in other ways?
So to assume that the platforms are devoid of politics or devoid of any, I wouldn't want to say bias, but certain amount of leeway is a very wrongly guided notion. Platforms are filled with politics. Like platforms are, one of the easy assumption that we make is that a platform can be replicated across geography, across community. That is not true at all. If you take a look at the way platforms perform when there is a particular geographical indicator or a community level initiative, it has a very differing position to it, or it has a very different kind of impact to it. So what the Wikimedia Foundation is trying to do in collaboration with the community is to listen and understand how can production of knowledge be made easier. So the utility quotient, again, is at two levels for us. The one is at the level of reading, where there is a, let's say, no Wikipedia page ever is complete. It's always in continuous development. But let's say that you're reading a page that's fairly well developed. So that has its own way of engaging with it. But let's say that there is another language, an Indian language, which needs content at a very high level. So how do we ensure that we are bringing people, and that becomes this pain point for us as well, whether we tackle this at the level of the technology, or whether we tackle this at the level of capacity, or whether we bring in some other measures that will talk about identifying the right kind of cues. Is it a cultural cue, or is it a peer cue that happens? So development of platform for us happens at 3 to 4 levels. The first level is at the technology. What is that structure? The second level is at the level of the initiatives and the impetus that we can provide. The third level is to find what are the interests and what are some of the stimulants that we can identify. And the fourth level is at the level of the utility. So is this article or is this campaign, because we run a lot of campaigns, we are engaging communities in many different ways to ensure that their attention and their contributions come towards that. So all of this contribute into making a robust platform for us.
And so to Rohan, while working with you on Sahapedia as your partner had a lot of custom requirements because of a very custom needs that we had, which as mapping organization you may not have encountered, but as a cultural organization we were like, this is basic, we definitely need this. So how do you evolve or adapt to different needs, not just of Sahapedia, but even say very specific needs in India that you may not see anywhere else? And with some examples, I think will be fun to hear some. This mapping is so tricky.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of kind of uh, I would say this is a tussle between what product or platform you're making and what your user or customer or partner who has to consume the platform or kind of interact with the platform in the kind of scenario you're drawing is for the purpose of creating content or publishing content. Um, uh, so I think it, of course, you've got to make your technology platform usable or consumable or interactable with the partner, with the person who's going to use it. And it's always the case. I mean, I echo what you said, that different people will have different levels of comfort with the technology. Somebody would want a really simple interface, and somebody would want a very pro level, advanced, detailed interface. And then some people would want it to the experience, the kind of journey that they have of interacting, or the workflow to be very different based on what their use case or their application is, for which they will say have offered this first and this second. And then the third aspect is different people will have different levels of motivation for using, the different kind of intensity of motivation for using or interacting with the platform, for which they are willing to work hard to bridge the gap between their need and what you're able to provide. Because obviously at any point of time, no platform can cater to all the needs of everybody in all the ways that they want. Um, so the challenge to us is always, can we try to make our underlying technology platform as flexible, as horizontal as possible, which is actually, frankly, really fun engineering challenge. And really at that point, the level of abstraction at which the brain is working, it doesn't matter who the user is. It's where you can go wild and like really kind of explore your engineering mindset and make a platform that's really flexible, really scalable. But then you've got to kind of create a couple of layers above that, which basically bridges the gap between that extremely flexible, extremely kind of scalable platform to start meeting the more and more bespoke needs of more and more kind of partners or users. And we call it kind of first party APIs, second party APIs, third party APIs, and then different types of interfaces, a simple interface, a complex interface, a workflow-driven configurable interface. So really, I mean, the challenges to serve the needs of all types of people is immense. Which is why kind of sometimes the easy thing to do is just make something for somebody, a point solution, and then make. But obviously that doesn't scale, so we iterate and we rebuild platforms, and so this is a utopian fantasy to be able to have such a platform. But I think at Mapma India, that's how we kind of engineer platforms. That's how we engineer our APIs. That's how we engineer our products. Solutions that specific solutions that people require is where the challenge is in terms of how much resource can be put in to specifically customize the product or API platform for them. If they're willing to kind of use the APIs that we have, technically speaking, they could have built their specific kind of module. But if we have to do that whole thing, then there is an organization that's needed for that. So hopefully that gives you kind of a principle of how we build. Yeah.
I completely hear you on the flexibility piece and how that part is fun, the abstraction of it. But you brought up a point about interfaces, and I think that is a nice segue into design, which is also a huge challenge when you're designing for culture for India, where there are very different aesthetics, very different, again, opinions. The design process for map.sahapedia.org never ended. It was a constant discussion and strong opinions, strongly held. And I wanted to bring Wikimedia and Tanveer into this, which I think they also struggle a bit with design. The content creation interface for Wikimedia is notoriously hard to navigate. So I wanted to understand the choices made when you're keeping the interface as is. I know there may be ways to improve it, and there may be enough people who are working on simpler interfaces. But what are the challenges when it comes to interface design? We'll start with content creation first, and then we can talk about the final UI, front-end UI.
I think we take umbrage in keeping it in black and white. That's the way that we have been dealing with it until now. But Wikimedia movement went through a strategy process, the entire movement, not just one organization, not one community. The entire movement kind of went through a strategy process. And one of the strongest recommendation was to make the UI much more appealing and much more accessible. So this was like a recommendation that came out of close to 18 months of conversations and consultations. So this is definitely high on the radar. So interestingly, the case of design, even though the platform looks very black and white and it's the way it is, which is very evident, is that there have been tweaks that are done to understand the local necessity. Take, for example, the Konkani Wikipedia. Now, the Konkani Wikipedia is a small Wikimedia project or a small Wikipedia project. But the fact that Konkani is spoken in approximately around 6 states and can be written in 3 to 4 scripts or 5 scripts, depending upon who you're talking to, made the question of contributing to Konkani Wikipedia a very interesting design question. So we could have obviously gone, because the most of the Wikipedia work that it was at that point was happening in Goa with the Devanagari script. But then we realized that this is a future-looking project. So the way that the entire design happened is that you can contribute in Romi, you can contribute in the Kannada script, and you can contribute in the Devanagari script. Of course, it uses a conversion tool, but the fact is the design has to allow for creativity both at the level of engagement and also at the level of the output. The level of the output is pretty easy. Can you convert it into a PDF? Like take, for example, another project that we work with called the Wikisource. The minute that it was realized that people are downloading books in many different formats like PDF and Mobi and EPUB and everything, thanks to the reading habits, that facility was made available. So the output is much more easier to design, or the output possibilities are much more easier to design than the way that you engage. And that's a conversation we are having across many languages, across many communities, and across many aesthetics as well. And more importantly, the Wikimedia Foundation's projects are at this point content-based, and very rarely are they, I mean, there is a whole a project called the Wikimedia Commons, but mostly it is text-based. How do we now move to all possible new forms and include all of them as legitimate knowledge contribution mechanisms is a big conversation that we are having now. Thank you.
Rohan, in case of Map My India and content creation, you have an in-house team. So over there, how do you work with design and handling all these different localized requirements? Or are you able to keep them uniform because it's an in-house team and in-house process?
Yeah.
Or is it an in-house team or in-house process? I may not.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, the entire stack of Map India from end customer to internal to content is all in-house. And the reasons for that are simple. Our intensity of motivation is extremely high. In the sense that we're all extremely passionate about kind of building and updating the map of India, and what we now call, we're building this 4-dimensional, high definition digital map twin of the real world that I think metaphorically people will understand, where we are trying to digitally and geospatially represent the dynamically changing real world in near real time. And so our team members, our people have extremely high level of passion of representing the real world in real time. But the good thing is our technology teams and our content teams kind of sit together. And so there's a high level of kind of negotiation between the teams saying that make my life easier through the technology you are building, for me to input data, for you to process that, for you to, through AI, through machine learning, kind of correct that data, because we have multiple sources of data, including the usage of our platform also kind of has a network effect or flywheel effect to kind of revalidate our maps. So there is I would say there's a fair bit of listening, fair bit of discussion, and but it is kind of overshadowed by everybody kind of overcoming whatever challenges that might be there, because their end objective is very clear. We want to build a very accurate, very feature rich, very detailed kind of digital map of the country. So maybe as we kind of scale towards taking in more contributions from the community, we will definitely face the challenges that kind of Wikipedia has faced, or Sahapedia has faced, or other or other more crowdsourced, consumer-driven platforms that are facing. And this is definitely something that's on my mind. So this is kind of a learning conversation, a learning moment for me, from you, and from Tanveer. So thanks a lot for some of the things that you guys are saying.
Of course, but the one thing that you mentioned about technology and content sitting together, that is And that being a tussle and a back and forth is something that we've also seen in Sahapedia, because something that is straightforward to implement is not easy to use all the time, or there's an inconvenience that a content creator has that is not obvious to the tech person. It could be something as simple as the position of a button, or whether it's a drop down or a versus a checkbox, or something, or not having something there
Or
at
a
all.
syntax.
Exactly.
As simple. Yep. Right.
So the part that I struggled with the most in Sahapedia was how much and how quickly can we get to a condensed list of requirements that are feasible, that are usable, and can hit timelines. So timelines is keeping the operational and logistical parts of it. The part about getting requirements articulated and coherent with each other, because a requirement from one person will not match with the others. So is that something that both of you, do you guys also face this, and how do you navigate these within your organizations? Either of you can go first.
I'm just trying to present a good or a succinct way of explaining this. So if you look at the way that the design is happening for most of the tech platforms and open source, I'm only referring to the open source, there is this tussle not only between knowledge and technology, there is also this tussle between a contributor and a user, in the sense of who comes in as a contributor, who wears the contributor badge, and who is the reader, or say the user. So what happens is, when a platform develops, at a level of an individual, when a platform develops, the focus is on content, that you make it content easy. Like, you are able to come and put the content in, the content gets relatively easy tags, and then you play with it. But the minute an organizational vision comes into a platform, then you're also talking about slightly more abstract things and very important things such as safety, security. And that actually makes the situation very complex. So you are, until this point, talking about a design that is friendly to the platform, that is friendly to the need of the user. Now there is a completely new question that you're bringing in. So an ideal situation would be where both of these questions travel together, but that's not usually how these platforms take their life. So the in-principle design to face the community or to work with the community is a fairly straightforward one. And that's the one that can usually hit all the timelines and you can plan to it. But there is a cognitive design that keeps changing with every new demography that you work with, every new technological upgrade that another platform goes through. For example, if you look at the Wikimedia movement itself, Wikimedia movement had done really well when it came to desktop engagement. Like, if you look at the document, if you read on it, if you work on some projects like Wikisource, desktop, amazing. But we kind of missed the bus on the mobile revolution. So it's not that we are totally out of the frame. We are still very relevant. We are still very utilitarian in that quotient. But if we had only become as sharp as we were with the desktop, then I think we would have traveled, then I think we would have achieved more in terms of our engagement. So this question of, when do you bring in the new demography, when do you allow for new technology alter your design, is equally important than the good design that you develop.
Yep. Which is the audience question. Like, what are people, if people's behaviors have changed, how do you react soon enough? How do you recognize that this is a point of change now? Rohan, what about you?
Yeah, it's I'll give you multiple kind of analogies. It's a little bit about kind of knowing exactly what the user wants. I've been keeping that in mind. That's how you kind of align everybody to kind of do what the user wants in the amount of time that the user wants. So kind of that's the deference, or that's the kind of saying that customer is king or user is king, or at the end of the day, you could be a smart engineer or a visionary product maker, but at the end of the day, it's your user, it's your customer who will decide whether whatever you build, is it actually useful and driving value. So I would kind of say that what we try to do is keep a short-term lens on mind and a long-term lens in mind. A short-term vision, a long-term vision. In mapping terminology, it's short-term path planning or long-term kind of destination or goals. So quick wins, foundational work. What that really does is it kind of, you have the micro steps that you have to take that and the team has to kind of work on that. But then you also know what's your eventual destination. And so while you're taking your micro steps, if at somewhere in the back of your mind, you're also kind of keeping in mind where you have to go, I think what that does is not that you'll get it all correct, you will kind of have these local minimas or kind of like taking a step back, etc., towards that eventual goal. But by and large, I think through osmosis, through kind of learning, you do make design choices, whether on interface, whether on technology, whether on usability, to serve the short-term requirement, somehow keeping in mind the long-term kind of vision that you have to do, because that's kind of the goal that you had set yourself. So at least that's how we try to navigate. Like Tanveer said, we are not always successful, but by and large, I think that keeps the organization. We have some pretty clear ideas about where the world should be and how maps can help. So what vision we've set out to achieve. But in the short term, we've got to navigate kind of immediate goals that customers, users, partners set. So hopefully that helps people in kind of their own planning and achieving of goals.
Now moving towards front end, while we were talking about interfaces for content creators, I'd like now to talk a little bit about front end and end users or readers and of users of platforms. I'll speak a little bit about Sahapedia. So Sahapedia's content, when we started, was long format because we were looking at cultural enthusiasts and a lot of the content was coming from experts. And however, a lot of the traction that we saw was on video, not in text. And that is the nature, again, it's a trend that has been seen worldwide. Visual content is now king, it's not so much text. However, you can't make visual content as easily as economically as text-based content is. And you can use visual content to gather interest, and then people will read. And that was the other realization that we had. So as we've slowly moved towards, even with the video format, we used to have, or we still have, long format videos, which we've created chapterizations so that people who are interested in only certain parts, because there's not enough patience to listen to a 1 hour long interview, you may be interested only in one aspect of it. And once you listen to one aspect of it, you will get interested in actually consume a lot more than you would otherwise have. So this sort of journey that we have had from long format to visual to shorter ways of allowing the user to sift through content within a longer format so that they can consume it easily has been one, specifically as our audiences have changed. And with maps at sahapedia.org, even when we're commissioning content, we've tried to create content which just didn't need to be that long. It could be shorter snippets, but it was dense enough so that when you're looking at a city like Pune, we would have 1,000 points of interest. And depending on your interest in a particular say natural habitats or flora and fauna, there would be enough things within that for you to get interested in Pune as a city and then start exploring more. How has your experience been? I know Mapma India, you work a lot with different ways of navigating maps. So I think that I would be interested in hearing more about that. And the same Wikimedia, on the other hand, you guys have, which I love, the long format, and it's broken down, and I'm guessing there'll be very different ideas in both of these. And how have you understood formats specifically for India? Have there been differences?
Yeah, from our perspective, there are so many different nuances to navigation and mapping in the Indian context. Um, for example, in our maps, one of the important things that we wanted to do is not just give traffic-based guidance that, that there's a traffic congestion here, but also give based on safety, so that there are speed breakers on your path, or potholes, or a fallen tree, or a sharp curve, because we believe that this can, or the road condition here is poor, or this is an accident prone zone, or this is an unsafe area from a crime point of view. We really felt that this would be more meaningful, more useful to people. Then of course traffic is important, but that's another layer that would be useful guidance to people. The other thing that we felt is giving photorealistic views. So we call it real view, where we can give you for junctions that you can encounter. Let's say you have to cross a flyover, or you have to know whether you have to go up the flyover or below the flyover. Now, a 3D split view is quite important if you can give that, and if you have such an advanced map, the technology, if you have it, the interface would be very useful to give to somebody that, that split 3D view, or how to take the U-turn underneath the flyover. And so a lot of, we have a lot of video footage also of different parts of the country, and we call it video maps, we call it real view, and you're going to start seeing a lot more of that kind of video based references, or reality view or real view kind of reflected in our maps and navigation. And the last thing I'll say is that what people should be contributing to the map is again very India specific, meaning people being able to report crime or unsafe places, or where street lights are broken, Swachh Bharat kind of initiatives. And then when COVID happened, some of our routing kind of algorithms factored in for that, whether you belong in a containment zone or a destination. So I think what we have built into the technology platform for mapping is this kind of real-time rich way of altering the way the map kind of informs you about where places are or what routes to take. And we are not driven by kind of advertising or those kinds of incentives or motivation. It's really to give an accurate, reliable kind of experience. So what really a user would want, irrespective of any other kind of motivation. So those are kind of the nuances that we've been successful in. There are more things we have to do in voice. The way you mentioned video, I think voice is a huge interface. I think that's a native interface, and it's something that we've talked about. Let's see how we're able to kind of bring that to life.
And voice is an interesting challenge, even for documenting oral traditions in India as well, from a Wikimedia point of view. How do you, with the current Wikimedia format, how do you account for these different forms and formats that exist and also need to be documented in some way?
Documenting oral history on Wikipedia per se has always been a slightly difficult challenge that we have been trying to work with. It's because, as the name goes, it's oral history. And from the way that the idea of Wikipedia has been conceptualized and it's been working, it heavily depends on academic references. So there is a very inherent bias there. And that's one of the big knowledge gap that we want to work with. Remember, I made reference to the movement strategy. One of the movement strategy recommendation was to try and bridge this gap, that not everything needs to be academic to be on or to be supported by academic references. So you are actually asking a deeper question of what comes into Wikipedia and what stays on Wikipedia. Does it always need to have 3 papers and 2 journals and 2 academic references, or is there a very different way of imagining? I think there are very different ways of imagining the front end or the way that we are looking at the project. Just to come back to the point that Rohan was making, I don't think all of these questions should be tackled by the organization that's working on the project by themselves. Like, take, for example, the Wikipedia project or the Wikisource project. The knowledge box idea was not a Wikimedia Foundation one. It was actually taken up by Google. So every time you search for something, that small snippet that comes up, that's also a front end of a very different kind. So
Right.
the very fact that the front end of the platform is different from the idea of the platform, these are two separate things.
Right.
Or take, for example, the link that you get at the end of the, or when you play a YouTube video, which says that this is the brief description, more information can be accessed on Wikipedia. That's also a way of engaging. So that's one way of imagining the front end. And what is also important is the way that the idea of your work gets shared. In very crude terms, let's call it sharing of the data. How do you share the data? Do you share the data in an intentional way, or do you share the data at an organizational level, which is not personal, which is at a level of data dumps, at a level of transfer of APIs? So that's one way of working. The other way of working is a very intentional way of saying that here are the 10 articles that you read over a period of time to understand, say, the Dalit history in India. So that's another way of engagement. And with this engagement, you create two very different kinds of people coming in, and you have that effect. So these are some of the ways in which you work with a community. You try to build that community of engagement.
I agree with you on that. Not everything has to be made by the platform. In fact, for oral history specifically, we were looking at Night Lab, and they have a sound site library. Because there's a lot of folk songs that we document in Sahapedia, and they're not in English, they're not even in Hindi. So you need somebody to explain certain parts of the song. So the person can either hear the song or they can read. Now, when you want to reference a certain part of the song while they're reading so that they know which point it is, SoundSite it's a library it's an open source library that was created that allows a certain, like hyperlinking, but it links to an audio piece. So you click on that word, and then that piece of audio plays while you're reading. So those kinds of libraries, I think, we need more of those, and easily integratables for platforms like Sahapedia, because we can't build all of these, and other archives as well. I think it really helps with consumption and making things easier to consume, even while keeping a text sort of format. And we've, even with our trails that we've worked on with MapMyIndia, we've used some open source libraries that were already there, and MapMyIndia helped us improve the flow so that it was easier to use and easier to navigate for an Indian audience. So I think that would also be something that is needed specifically for India as well. There are certain tools, libraries that we don't have that probably exist in other parts of the world that are relevant to that context. And with my background in data science, I know that there are trained algorithms in Russian, trained algorithms in German, but absolutely none that have been trained in Indian languages. So if you even want them to, if you have your own data set and you want to borrow something that exists, that thing does not exist anymore. And that would be something that would be really nice to have for cultural content to become more consumable and accessible to others as well. Who do you ask for, and how do you get those made is the challenge. It's not something you can affect. I want to talk about the sharing piece that you talked about. So what has your experiences been, MapMyIndia and Wikimedia, on sharing of information, sharing of data sets, sharing of knowledge in India? Is it easy? Is it forthcoming? What are the challenges, and why do you think they exist?
Yeah, I mean, I guess most of our users and most of our customers use MapMyIndia because they're trying to understand through maps about places, about how to get to places, how to analyze hyperlocally. So we definitely do feel like we are giving organization, because most of our APIs are used to kind of geocode or reverse geocode or open up a map of a place or to find places nearby. You are right. It can be very hard to get organizations to share information with each other. But I think, when people's incentives align, and I'll give you a couple of examples in the last 1.5, 2 years with COVID, it became very important for the government, for example, to share where the hunger and night shelters were during the time of that migrant worker crisis. And they shared that with us, saying that, put it out there so that people can find those near them. And also there was this really good organization called Gramvani, which was collecting, you talked about oral, so voice clips or voice reports of migrant workers from the around the country. And they said, let's put it on the map. We had this Corona kind of dashboard so that the authorities could understand what issues people were facing where. Um, and then with this vaccine center vaccination drive, the government again shared that these are all the vaccination centers. Now, they did not know where they were located, they just had the addresses. So we had to run it through our tools to geocode, create the map, and then, those what we did is we made that widget kind of open for other people. And I think Team SOS India and many other organizations kind of integrated this. Truecaller as an app took this to, I guess, 200 million users. So and then finally, one big thing that happened was ISRO, the Indian Space Research Organization, and us. We kind of partnered together to kind of, for us to share our maps with them to enrich their portals for scientific and academic usage, and them to share their wide catalog of Earth observation data, which can tell you very interesting things like, on the Varka beach in Goa tomorrow, will there be a rip current? So that you can plan whether you want to go to that beach tomorrow, or what the soil moisture level is in a place, solar potential is. So I mean, the incentives need to align, and that ISRO MapIndia partnership was aligned because we want to create this end-to-end indigenous geospatial solution to make India Atmanirbhar for the citizens and countries. So I guess finding that meeting point for organizations is important, and then sharing happens.
And do you think incentives are aligned? You're on mute.
I'm sorry. It had to happen at least once, right, in a conversation in Zoom. So, it's a tricky one because coming from an open source community and to have this entire body of work taken up by volunteer community, and then talk about how do we understand the relationship between production of knowledge and then transfer of knowledge is something that we have not been able to understand fully well. So let me put it this way. Every time an organization, a non-profit organization, makes use of content on Wikimedia projects, I think we feel happy and there is a lot of gratitude that the content is getting used. But if a big tech company uses it, then there is always this question, is this what we wanted to do? Or is this how we wanted the content to go? Not that we disagree with it. Mm-hmm. So I think these conversations have led to a very interesting positioning where Wikimedia Foundation is now developing something called a Wikimedia Enterprise. So this is where you have a premium access to the APIs and to those services and to the data. So there are a lot of interesting conversations every time we talk about a test case, either at the level of sharing of knowledge or at the level of sharing of technology or the design of platforms. So I don't have like a good answer for this, but it's interesting to see how we talk about what seems to be our mission and how technology seems to be contributing or altering that idea of the mission. Mm-hmm. So there's some very interesting questions in chat. So I was just trying to, yeah. So I think Neha had a question. I think Sayali asked a question that I think Rohan.
Oh my God, I just saw them. Go ahead. Which one do you want to pick, Tanveer?
I think the question that Sonia is asking, what's next on this culture and technology field, is a very interesting one. How does one answer this question with so many variables? Because technology is such a big variable, culture is such a big variable. The only guarantee that I can think of is there's going to be a tussle. There's always going to be this interesting conversation between technology and culture. And there might be a very interesting phase of co-design between these two, let's call influences of our life. I don't know if you remember, there was a point in time where smaller the mobile, the more fashionable it was. And then we moved on to a very different way of looking at where the bigger the mobile, the fashionable it was. And now we are at a relatively well-balanced juncture. I think that's going to happen with the way technology and culture is also going to interact. We are going to be very polemical about where do we want technology to affect culture. And then we're also going to be very polemical about how much will the culture decide on the digital technology. And then we will arrive at some kind of equilibrium. We are definitely nowhere near that, but that's going to be interesting. That conversation, that tussle is going to be very interesting.
True. In fact, one of the things I wanted to discuss, maybe we'll end the conversation with that, but I'll come to it, which is how do you bridge the people gap between, say, the arts and technology and humanities and technology? Because right now they're very different. They feel that they can't talk to each other, and they feel that one person doesn't have a say in the other, and the other person feels they don't. An arts person doesn't have say in technology, which really isn't true. And both will benefit so exponentially by bringing it together. But there is this perception and mistrust of each other, which I think is going to be gapped as well. But that the way it'll be gapped is when this mistrust, I feel personally, goes away. And how we can make that happen in India, where I think the gap is particularly large, is something I want to bring up maybe towards the end. But there's another question about technology-based approach. Has it made culture a popular subject amongst youngsters? And are they more interested in taking it up long term? What do you think about that, Tanveer? Or yeah, Rohan?
So last year, we worked very closely with BITS Pilani in terms of incubation, innovation, and also taking on students, engineers to kind of come and join MapMonday to work on products and platforms. But last year, we did something very different. We got these bright students to work on actually a cultural lab. We called it Pray. We call it Pray. And kind of our idea was, it's different. It was part of innovation at MapMa India, that people should want to connect with their cultural, religious, and spiritual roots. And we thought that there is an intersection of that with maps, in the sense that, finding places to visit, which are related to your culture, religious, and spiritual inspiration, or tactically, if you have to find places of worship nearby, or kind of you have to buy kind of samagri or whatever for pujas at home, or whatever your worship or meditation kind of beads if you have to buy. So I was really skeptical whether these students would love to kind of go through the user research of what a cultural app could be, and then actually want to build it, because they had this other choice of working on something hyper local and like e-commerce. But I was shocked. I was just shocked that this is the one that they chose, and they did a great job. We've put the app on the app stores, and they continue to be passionate about it. So I think it's a movement that people like you all have kind of started to create. It's a matter of kind of touching people's kind of chords. And I think there'll be a fair bit of people who will look to connect at some stage or the other. But anyhow, this is an anecdotal view, not a statistically representative view.
What about you, Tanveer? Do you see a lot of young kids interested in culture as a result of technology?
So the researcher in me wants to ask a clarificatory question. What would culture be here? because remember the ABCDE of the digital culture that I started to put together. So are people going to be engaging with anything that's keenly and closely contested, yes, and culture is keenly and closely contested. So this could be culture of work, this could be culture of production of knowledge, this could be culture of our religion, our social practices, whatever that is. Now, what technology does is it gives you the right to dissent. It also gives you the ability to continue it. Now, take, for example, the WhatsApp messages that circulate. Now, you are continuing in it, right? Like you continue that conversation. Most of them are your good morning and good evening. But if you were to just look at the way, it is allowing you to engage and to continue something. And it's very important, Rohan's point that he made of building. We're also building culture. We usually miss out on the fact that technology is working with culture in a way that it speaks to the culture of the past or it speaks to the culture of the future. There is also a culture at this point that we are referring to. How else would you talk about a maker space? How else would you talk about an open source community? How else would you talk about, say, a body of practice that kind of shaped and resulted in something like an Arab Spring? So this is not culture of the past. This is your, and this is not your culture of the future also. This is not that utopia, nor is it, the, what's the term that I'm looking, the Terminator culture of all the cyborgs and the sci-fi. It's a culture that you are very aware, and technology is but a medium to work with it. It all depends upon how we are going to frame it, whether the academia is going to start an MBA program, or tomorrow some university is going to come in and appropriate it, or say there is going to be the equivalent of the Baijus and the Akashas to talk about the way that the digital is going to operate. Then there is going to be a very, very strong engagement. If you look at the way cricket in India took over, it was not simply because of money. It was also because of a very grassroots level of saying that there is a cricket practice available. There's a sports store that sells you the cricket goods and in competitive prices. And the state also supported building of the stadiums. All of this happened. So if the state comes in very strong, if the academic institutions come in very strong, if it is going to be picked up by, say, the online industry of mass media and entertainment, this interaction between technology and culture is going to be very interesting.
From an engineering student point of view, I think culture also offers a fuzzy problem that is not easily solved. And that's what attracted me. And it's still not solved. So youngsters like, I think, fuzzy problems. So that still exists. And I think that won't go anywhere as well. So I think that's also what makes it attractive. The fact that there's not one solution, there are different ways of solving it, and all of them will get you to a certain point. And so everyone can make a difference in some way, as opposed to other subjects, whether it's subjects of research and engineering and other ways where a lot of work has already been done. I think culture is still unexplored a little bit, and the problems are, like you said, hyper-local when it comes to problems of language, solving for Indian language, solving for Indian context, even if it is in English. These are each of these are very, very interesting and fun problems to solve as well. There's a very interesting question from Neha, which should be, I think should be a nice controversial question to ask. So let's have fun with that. I'd like to ask both of you if you can use an example to demonstrate how you deal with instances where there may be differences in political and cultural understandings, and yet it needs to be represented on your platforms. For example, political boundaries of India as a country, or cultural boundaries of a historic region such as Awadh. What criteria are used by your teams and communities in making these decisions?
I'll go first because, see, specifically political boundary of India, we are quite clear. We will show what the government of India believes. We do believe, so we're a business, we're an organization. We do believe we need to have a point of view because we have a responsibility. We cannot chicken out. This is our point of view, and I'm not saying this has to be true for everybody, because it's part of our promise as a business that we will represent India and solutions for India. So when it comes to like mapping the country, we know exactly where we stand. We don't have multiple masters or kind of dualities. Yeah, it's quite a clear kind of decision making process for us when it comes to kind of representing maps. But yeah, it may not be. People will have different opinions about what I said, but we are quite clear.
Tanveer, what about you? How do you handle political and cultural differences when they have to be represented?
I actually responded to Neha via chat. I think we stand on the opposite spectrum of this, because we are a community of volunteers, and it's an organized. It's not a political or a social business. We try to represent this in the neutral point of view, which means that it does not take any position, but it tries to reflect as clearly and with as much of evidence as possible all possible views of it. So take, for example, the Kaveri water disagreement, and I say this because I'm a Kannadiga. So in that case, we don't try to make the argument of this of a claim that was made by either of the government to be correct or incorrect. We just say that these claims were made and then provide references to it. Is this the best way to do it? Are people happy about it? Definitely not. But since we, like I mentioned earlier, we don't claim to be the primary source of information. We don't claim to be the secondary source of information. We are the tertiary source of information that tries to reflect all of the conversations that are around there. So, yeah. But this is going to get very interesting the minute it's going to be a business case. Tomorrow, if you're going to take the Wikipedia pages and develop it into, say, a commercial business model for raising funds, or for in some way for revenue generation, then I think we'll have to have more nuanced conversation about this. But I think, sorry, absolutely last. I think Neha has a very important point there, which is about what is the plus responsibility that organizations or platforms take here. It's one thing to have a position, but what about the responsibility here? Since we work with volunteers, I think the responsibility is not only about the accuracy of the content or the positionality of the content, but is also about the well-being of the community itself. I think that is the responsibility that our movement takes up.
Are there any other questions? I think there's the last one from is this a question? The engagement of generations present and next will decide on access and utility. This looks more like a statement. In countries, societies that will have a high... Tanveer, you've sent this. Okay.
In response to one of the questions
that
we got earlier.
So I'd like to close with this one point that I brought up a little bit earlier, which is how do we bring art and technology, or culture and technology closer together when it comes to as a discipline and as people, specifically India. Indian engineers versus liberal arts students, they are very far away from each other when it comes to communicating and interacting. There is also this mistrust between each other. What one will say, the other one may not even understand where the other person is coming from. And this, I think, is where this is my opinion, but us as engineers need to improve as well to be able to compete at a global level. But is there something that our platforms and our organizations can do? And what is it that is missing that is causing this gap between the arts and the engineering in India?
See, I mean, I'll give my point of view. I think more artists are consuming technology or are leveraging technology to reach their audience now. I think over the last many years, or 5 years or so, this whole creator culture or this whole kind of creator economy has meant that artists have found a stage using technology and using technology platforms or technology kind of almost marketplaces or social media to kind of reach an audience. And I definitely have views about how that in many cases has been very destructive because of the incentives around advertising and attention economy and all of that. But the part one can appreciate is the access to that artist or the amplification of that artist's art. I think what's happening now is, great engineers and great technologists like yourself who've kind of created the Sahapedia platform around mapping. You are enabling, and more, it will happen more. I mean, I have so many thoughts on the metaverse and what it can mean when artists can create using the tools that technology provides. I just always worry about the incentives behind many business models around advertising and attention economy. But otherwise, I'm extremely bullish that technology and the kind of enablement of kind of internet speeds and latencies is allowing artists to leverage technology to reach an audience, but also kind of present their art digitally, physically plus digitally. And so if there is a way to kind of avoid the dystopia of the metaverse that is likely going to happen, and if there's a counterbalance that exists against these ad-driven kind of social media and social search engines, so I'm rooting for Wikipedia kind of enterprise to kind of provide a clear kind of value proposition versus kind of the other kind of hidden or indirect kind of models. So I really think that, this is a golden era probably of art and technology. And Sahapedia Maps, I feel, and the Sahapedia Maps platform, maybe kind of we're just at the first stage of kind of where we can go with it. And so that's why kind of I'm excited about kind of looking at not just the 2-dimensional, but the 3-dimensional, and then the 4-dimensional, and then the high definition immersive way in which hopefully Sahapedia, Map My India, and many such organizations can work together to create some pretty interesting intersection of art and technology around mapping, at least.
No pressure, Tanveer. Can you save the arts?
In so many ways, this seems to be the perfect way to wrap up this conversation, right? So this question is at two levels for me, Rachna. The first one is at the level of access and utility. Like very straightforward. The easier a tool is going to get, the more people are going to interact with it, and the tool is going to become better and better. Take, for example, the Indic keyboards that came in. The reason why today Facebook has long posts by that one uncle who has an opinion on everything is because it's not just English, but he can write in Kannada also. It's so easy. Did that gentleman have this knowledge about Google or about Indic computing or about typing? Not really. But the tool became very intuitively easy and you're able to do it. Or take, for example, the money market. Not everybody who engages on money market or those complex looking charts that seem to be always on the walls or on the computers are very easily understandable. These are not people who have gone into an engineering college or have had years and years and years of academic training, but you still do it because it's a tool and it allows you to engage, and then there's a learning that happens. So it's at that level, and everything that Rohan said makes perfect sense. The more you engage, the more tools that you build, it will work out, and that's the future that we are going towards. But there's a deeper question here, which is of the values. Why is it that we don't talk about philosophy of science in an engineering? Not that the IITs are not doing it. If you look at their curricula, there is a course like that. I've been part of many of those discussions. But why is it that universities don't talk about this in an intentional way? Why are we shying away from conversations that will try and make humanities a part of your conversation or critical discourse a part of the larger pedagogic structures? Because until we don't bring those conversations, be it into the engineering classroom or the medical classroom or the legal classroom, or for that matter, the other way around, we are always going to be dependent on tools and not on values. So the tool will have to come because of an external impulse or a market interest, but not because of the necessity of a community. If the community is able to formulate its request or formulates its thinking into a way that it comes together, I think that's by far the most powerful expression of the working between culture and technology. Everything else that we're talking about, the platform, the app, the tool, is a very poor indication of that. It's just because we don't have a strong indication of that, we are very happy with the poor indicators. But the minute we are going to have this, we are going to understand what would be the range and what would be the impact of such an engagement. So, when you talk about philosophy of science, or when you're talking about the importance of having certain conversations, like critical conversations around pedagogy, around literature, around law, it's going to open up a very new engagement pattern for us. So that's probably the way that we save arts and sciences together.
Absolutely. Very well said. And we're now severely over time, but what you said reminded me of this one instance very early when I had just started working in Sahapedia, and I can't remember who, but somebody had asked me, can people who write in Hindi or in Indian language, can they code? And I said, yes, of course. Why, coding is for everyone. They're like, yeah, but if they don't know what A, B, C, D is, can they still write code? And that question blew my mind, because it had never occurred to me that, because computer language, you think of it as a language that is, it's beyond English. You don't think of it as English as a rate limiter, but it is absolutely so. And that is sort of, the importance of having, like you said, these sort of critical questions. It will show you avenues that you have not even thought of. And I think we look forward to opportunities like that as well, where those interactions can happen. I think, Rohan, do you have any closing remarks?
It's been so great to kind of be on this panel with you guys. And I mean, thanks so much for the conversation. I highly encourage people to check out Sahapedia Maps. It's taken a lot of hard work for a lot of people, and to kind of come together at the intersection of culture and technology. And yeah, thank you for the time.
Thank you so much, both Rami and Rohan, and Sayari also for co-hosting.
Thank you.
Rohan, Tanveer, and Rachna. That was a very insightful conversation and much needed conversation. So thanks for joining us today, and thanks to all our audience who joined and sent in their questions. So before we sign off, a reminder to go and explore map.sahapedia.org. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.